Again, thank you all for coming. My name is Christina Cardona. I'm the new coordinator for internships and career programming for Rockefeller College. And I just started my position in June, so I'm pretty new here, but I'm really excited to get to know you all further, hopefully in future career workshops and fairs and all of those sorts of things. So thank you again for being here. And today we're going to just jump right into discussing how to revamp your resume. And we have specific strategies for how to do so in this presentation and how to really make your presentation or how to really make your resume stand out to employers. So we're going to go here. Okay, here we go. Perfect. So just a little overview of our support team. So Addison, I added you right here. So updated slide. So basically, I'll start with, as I said, the overview of our support team. So, as I mentioned, I'm new to this position and super excited to be here and connect with you all. And then we also have, and also just as a note, my office is on the downtown campus in Milne Hall 121B, but I'm also uptown 1 day a week on Mondays at the on the main campus at the contact office. So I also will just mention here too, Ashley Dwyer. She's our director of career services and employer relations. And Ashley is also on the downtown campus in Milne Hall 105, along with Addison, who is right here on the call. So Addison, thanks for being here too. And Addison is our new career office graduate assistant. So she is doing the Rockefeller Careers email. So you'll be getting some emails in our newsletter from Addison. So, which is going out today as well, which is exciting, our weekly newsletter. So, yeah. And then going to Joan Marso is our undergraduate internship and career coordinator, and she's located on the Uptown campus primarily. So, and some of our contact information generally is listed below at the bottom for the general email, and then our emails, respectively, are also listed here as well. And it'll also be at the end of the presentation too, with our office hours and just general scheduling and appointment instructions via handshake. So that is something that you'll all have accessibility to do. So let's go right into our a little overview of our mission and services if you're not familiar with Rockefeller thus far. So we'll go into the resume revamp workshop agenda, but before we do that, let's just go through this really briefly. And today we're focusing on resumes, but of course, as the Office of Career Services, we offer a variety of services. So, and it's important to note that we're here for you, from orientation to graduation. So for every step of the way, because oftentimes, students think that career services is something you go to at the end of your academic experience, but we just want to emphasize the fact that we're here through every step of the way. And just a general note, as I mentioned before, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but we'll answer those at the end after I stop the recording and we can go through that. And if you'd like to stay on and ask me, you know, after the after the call is over or, after our session is over, you can also do that as well. So going into, again, on this slide, we have cover letter assistance. That's one of our other services that we offer. We also offer guidance using Handshake, our career management platform, which you used when registering for this workshop. So thanks for doing that. And you can continue to do that for all other workshops and upcoming career services events. And we also offer services in interview guidance, internships, finding jobs and internships, and also LinkedIn networking strategies. We really offer a variety here, as you can see. And you can make an appointment for any type of those services via Handshake again, or drop into our office hours, which again are listed at the end of this presentation. So going right in here to our resume revamp workshop agenda. So I hope you guys like the name of this workshop. It's again something a little different, but just to again focus on improving your resume, revamping, tailoring your resume for job and internship applications, and specifically how we do that and how we want to do that. So, diving right in, we'll start off generally with what is a resume as a refresher, and then how to write a resume, how not to write a resume, and mistakes to avoid, as well as formatting, articulating your resume or articulating skills. And we'll go into as well how to making sure you're highlighting relevant skills on your resume for the applications that you're in jobs that you're applying to and what's really important to note. And we'll also talk a little bit about NASPA and NACE, which are some of our NASPA is our accrediting um, agencies. So we'll go into that. And then we'll also wrap up with next steps in career resources as well. So, and again, we'll go into your next steps and what you can do following this workshop for how to improve your resume and the best action steps to take, and some career event highlights, which we'll go through at the end, appointments and office hours, and again, resources. So, let's get right to that. Okay. So, here we've got what is a resume? So, and just another note, if you don't have a resume already, this is kind of your sign to just get started making a resume and creating one. And we're here to help you through that process. So, and as I said, it's totally okay if you don't have one right now, but definitely this is a great time to get started on that. And if you do have a resume already, going through how to improve your current resume is really the goal of this workshop. So, we really just want to provide an overview here of what exactly a resume is and why it's important. And a resume essentially is an employer's first look at you, and it's a professional snapshot. It's essentially your foot in the door for an opportunity to interview. It should be concise, clear, and easy to read. And generally, it's really important in this process to be truthful and honest. This is your resume. This is a living document that you're making changes to. It's not somebody else's resume. So you definitely should not be, having somebody else write your resume. This is really personal and authentic to you. And it's also, like I said, it's a living document. So it's subject to change as you gain more experience. And we'll go into more depth about that as well, and how to format and what would be necessary and relevant for you to include. And like I mentioned, it's really the opportunity. This document is an opportunity to really market your career related skills and yourself as a professional. So this is why this document is so important. It's the employer's first glance at you, and you want that, of course, to be a good one. So we're going to go into more specifically how to write a resume effectively. Okay, so going into, as I said, how to write a resume, again, really the key is remembering that a resume should be clear, concise, and an overview of your experiences, a summary of what's important and what's relevant for employers when they're looking at your resume quickly. They're likely not going to be spending multiple hours reviewing every line of your resume. So that being said, you really want to have clear formatting, which again we'll go into, but that their first glance is that it's professional, it's easy to read, it's concise, and it's something that they're going to see and say, okay, this is a good representation of this individual and how they would be in this position. So it's interesting enough to, of course, they're looking at your experiences and seeing that you're a good fit. But even if you have incredible experience, if your resume is not professional and concise, they're not really even going to go further to see that you would be a good fit. So that's something to again remember how important it is to have a clear looking, concise resume. And we'll go more into depth with that as well. So on that note too, in order to do this effectively, in order to have a clear, concise, easy to read resume, you're going to want to divide your resume into sections. And at the end of this presentation, we have our resume handbooks. So we have a specific resume, or we have career handbooks and specifically a resume handbook. So that being said, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at those sample resumes for how this should look. And we will go further to show, okay, what's an example of this? And a sample resume, and we'll take a look through in the presentation at one of those. But if you want more time, of course, to go through that, we do have that link at the end, and we have copies both online and in person if you were to stop into both our downtown and uptown offices. So just something to keep in mind. They're nice, they're color coded, so I use it frequently. So just definitely keep in mind these resources are available to you. So, taking advantage of them is definitely important. So on that note, like I said, dividing your resume into sections is really important, and we'll go through what those sections are, what they're called, and how they should look. And also making sure to put your entries and your experiences in reverse chronological order. So that means putting your most recent experiences at the top of your resume, and then going in order of most recent, and then going at the bottom would be your least recent or your like really, past experiences, if that makes sense. So just making sure that, for example, you have an experience that might be listed as for the date June 2024 to present. And then if you have a past experience, you would list it as, we'll say, June 2021 to June 2023, for example, and just making sure that's in reverse chronological order. So, and something also, as I mentioned, with formatting, just being consistent. We have a slide on that where we'll go into a little bit more depth with how to do that effectively. Font size, style, spacing as well, and we'll go into more depth with that as well. But that again is really important. And prioritizing the top half of your resume for the most relevant information too. You're not going to want to have an experience that's really relevant to the job you're applying for and put that at the bottom of your resume where an employer isn't going to see that, as the first thing they look at. You really want to highlight what is the most important and relevant at the top, or at least the middle of your resume where it's easy to see and accessible. So that being said, like I mentioned, they are a unique style of writing. So that being said, they're very they're written very differently than other college writing you've done so far. So it's not a resume, it's not a research paper, it's not an essay. You're not going to want to write in long paragraphs. And because again, you want to communicate effectively to employers who haven't met you. And again, being professional and that you would be a good fit for their position is showing that you know how to write an effective, concise, to the point resume while also highlighting your most relevant skills and experiences. So something also to note with that, and again, we'll see this through samples and, just how to write a bullet point for your resume, is that you want to avoid I statements. You want to, again, just be using strong action verbs to show what you did, how you did it, and being results driven with that. And we'll go more into depth with that as well. But on that note, too, with being professional, is that you really want to make sure you're spell checking, you're proofreading carefully, and you want to spell out acronyms to demonstrate, you also know what your company or the organization you worked for, what that stood for. That also shows your own knowledge, but then also to the employer, they might not know what that means. So you really want to spell out any acronyms that not everybody would know when you're putting experiences on your resume. And another thing too is just showing that, like I mentioned, with listing dates and, putting entries in reverse chronological order, you're really going to want to ensure proper tense. So, for example, if you have your most recent experience that is still ongoing, that you haven't, finished that experience yet, such as, like I said, June 2024 to present, you're going to want to make sure that your bullets are being written in the present tense. You don't want to have past tense written for an experience that's still ongoing, and the same thing for past experiences. You want to make sure that those are written, the bullet points are written in past tense to again ensure proper tense, and also shows that you're really reading and taking the time to make sure that your resume is accurate and professional. And again, those are things I'll keep repeating, but are really just some of the most important things in terms of resume writing effectively. And like I mentioned, you don't want to have complete sentences. You don't want to have, long paragraphs. You want to really focus on the bullet point format, which we'll see and talk about. And those are again in the resume handbook, which we'll take a look at for examples of how you would do this to highlight your skills and achievements concisely. So, another thing also to mention in terms of just how to maintain a effective, concise resume is making sure that it's about a page. Sometimes as a graduate student, it can be up to 2 pages at the graduate level as you're gaining more experience, but generally, if you can make it closer to a page, that is your best bet. Just being said, as we discussed, employers aren't going to want to read, pages and pages of your experience. They're really going to want to see what is most relevant and making sure that when you're reflecting on your experiences that you're including, again, the most relevant details rather than just like every single task or responsibility that you held while you were there. And we'll go more into depth with that as well with tailoring your resume and writing effective bullet points. So again, it's really important to be results driven and quantifying, even if you weren't dealing with numbers. And we'll see examples of that as well and talk about that. But making sure that you're being specific. And if there were, how many people did you serve? How many people did you work with? How often did you do something? All of those details are really important to show both what you did and how your result was effective for, your team, for example. So those are some of our main tips for how to write a resume effectively. So we'll move into how not to write a resume. So just as some reminders here, we've got, for example, like I mentioned, you want to keep your resume to about a page, can be up to 2. So that being said, you're not going to want to list every single job you've ever held. So that being said, again, relevancy is really what we're looking at here. We're not going to want to include every experience. And that doesn't mean you have to delete them forever. A lot of times we talk about a master resume. So that being said, your master resume could be your document you have on file with all of your experiences. But let's say you're applying to a specific job where your one job experience or internship that you had a while ago or that was in an unrelated field isn't as relevant to put. You can, again, keep that on file, but for that specific job application, you don't need to include it. Again, just keeping in mind what's relevant, what is going to best match you up with the job description that the employers have put out and what is going to make you seem like the best fit for the job. So, that being said, also, again, with conciseness and being professional, you're not going to want to include personal information. You're not going to want to include photos. For example, you don't want your social security number. You don't want your height, your weight, like details like that mentioned. Sometimes on resumes, those can be on there, but for a standard, resume, you really don't want those personal information details listed. So that being said, like I mentioned, tailoring your resume is something that's a really important point we kind of want to hone in on as we're improving our resumes. And that being said, you don't need to use or you don't want to use the same resume for every job application. So, that being said, you don't want to copy and paste the same things that will just show that you haven't really reviewed the job description. So, like, if you've had an experience where you could highlight a relevant skill that is also mentioned in the job description, you're going to want to do that. And again, we can talk more about that later. But that being said, you don't want to submit the same thing for every job application. And again, tailoring your resume is what's important here. That being said, even though we want to be relating back to the job description and reviewing that as you're applying for certain roles or for internship roles, that doesn't mean that you want to include, things that aren't true or honest, that you want to include, you don't want to include like buzzwords or fluff words that you think sound good to an employer that either aren't true or don't really add to your experience or show your driven results. So that being said, just keeping in mind, again, conciseness, to the point, what you did, how you did it, and we have a lot of samples for how you can do that effectively, while you're reflecting on your experience. So, Again, another note too, a common question we'll get is references. So some employers will ask for references for a job, but just to note here, you don't want to have your references listed on your resume. So, like that being said, that doesn't mean you also want to put like references available upon request. You don't want to have that like, sentence on your resume. That will just be something you can upload your references on a separate document, for example. But you don't want to have those on your actual resume document. So, and again, to, as I keep saying, conciseness, consistency, etc. You don't want to have inconsistent formatting or a font style that is either hard to read, that's a color that might not be picked up by, we'll say, like an online resume reader, for example, just because a lot of times nowadays resumes are submitted online. And I use Times New Roman. I'll use a black font, like, 11, 12-point font, just making sure it's legible, but also not too big for at least the content of my resume. That being said, making sure that you're using the same font throughout your resume and you're not, again, just showing professionalism in both your writing and just showing that you have taken the time to make sure that your resume is, you know, again, professional, easy to read, and consistent, and that you care enough to spend the time to make sure that it is clean and, again, polished for the employer when reviewing it. Because again, a disorganized resume is really going to be a turnoff immediately for employers, and they're not even going to get to the point of reviewing your actual experiences if they're seeing typos and inconsistent font or, spelling mistakes or things like that. But so definitely that's extremely important to keep in mind. And like I said, definitely keep in mind again, this is your document. Don't let anybody else write it for you. Don't use a template, a resume program or a template. Definitely refer to the career handbooks in this. We have samples, we have, action word, samples as well, just examples of how to write strong bullet points, and absolutely make an appointment with us to review your resume. And, even when creating your resume, how to get started. We are here for that. So we'd rather you do that than, use a template that might not be accurate as to what, a standard resume should look like. And going off of the point again, try not to highlight what you did. For example, highlighting accomplishments rather than duties. You don't want to just put like that you were tasked with something and then just have that be your entire bullet. You want to have it be like, again, we'll go into some samples of that and you can refer to the resume handbook, but making sure that you're not just listing stuff. You want to be results driven. You want to quantify, you want to show how did what you were tasked with benefit the company or your team or, all of those things as a whole. So that's really going to highlight what you did rather than just what you were told to do. And again, don't include past, experience such as from high school that you don't need anymore. You don't need to include your high school graduation year on there or, your high school GPA or anything like that. We're really going to focus on what you're doing currently and over the past few years. So, and again, that just shows professionalism and the knowledge that you can, again, you're being recent and relevant with your experiences. So, we'll go into again how to break down your resume in order of sections. So, that being said, building a resume, order of sections, and again, this slideshow or this presentation is recorded, so you'll have access to review this again for the order of sections, but you can also review or refer to those samples in the resume handbook as well. So just so you have in mind as well, your heading will be the start of your resume, then followed by your education, if applicable, honors and awards, relevant coursework, research experience, academic projects or presentations, then followed by relevant experience, additional experience as applicable, leadership experience as applicable, and community service and volunteer experience as applicable. So just keeping in mind the ones that have stars on them or asterisks are optional. So you really just have to have the required sections are your heading, your education, your relevant experience, and your skills. But those other sections are definitely important and especially good to include if you have more limited relevant work experience or professional experience, for example. So as I said, we're gonna, this slide is really just showing a snapshot of what you should include in your resume and how a resume is built. And it's also, again, showing how to enhance your resume. So, where can you add more detail or where can you add, let's say, as I mentioned, you don't have a ton of relevant work experience, but you've done some really great research experience and you want to highlight that. And it's, relevant to a job you're applying for or an internship experience where you can show that you have certain, field specific knowledge. That might be a good opportunity to include relevant coursework. And we'll go into that as well. So, as I said, the heading is mandatory. So that's where you're going to want to include your name, bolded large, so that it's like, again, the employer is matching your name with your experience and it's easy to read. And again, clear. You don't have to search for where your name is on the document. You're also going to want to include your contact information, like your phone number, your email address, and your personal LinkedIn URL if you have a LinkedIn. So, and if you don't, I would definitely recommend creating one and also only including that LinkedIn URL as applicable. So you don't want to, put that on there if you haven't looked at your LinkedIn account in a few years and it's not up to date. Only if you've put relevant experience and information from your resume on LinkedIn or, again, as long as it's updated, that's when you would want to have that listed. And also, just another note about your heading and your contact information. As you'll see in samples in the resume handbook, you don't need to have your entire street address listed for your address. But I would recommend having an address, let's say it's local to Albany and you're applying for a job in Albany, just listing Albany, New York, and it can be Albany, NY, on your resume is important to include, but you don't have to say your entire street address. So, and again, it's really whatever would be for that part of it, for the location and your address, whichever you think is going to be most relevant for the role you're applying for. So, say you are applying for a role and you, again, happen to be located near it. It's always great if they see, okay, this person is local. That's just an added benefit, if, as applicable. And as I said, we'll go through a couple of these section headings, including education, which we'll go into next. So, for the education section, as I said, it is a mandatory section. And for that, you want to include, as applicable, your master's degree information, even if it's in progress, your bachelor's degree info, also any minors and or concentrations, and as long, of course, as relevant here. And if you've had an associate's degree, if you've transferred schools, all of that information should be listed here. So again, just keeping track of your education is really important here. And again, same as the other sections, just making sure that this is in reverse chronological order. So if you are pursuing your master's, having that go above your bachelor's degree, for example, you want to have that be your most recent one. And you can say, as we see as on this sample on the slide, expected May 2025. This is clearly still in progress, right? But we're still seeing that, the coursework that it isn't actually listed here. But for example, honors and awards listed here at the master's level are still listed because clearly this person is still having relevant, experience that an employer would like to see, even if they haven't, finished their degree yet, right? So their master's degree. So, and again, GPA, this person has a 3.85. I would say if your GPA is over a 3.0, it's definitely great to highlight, especially again, as you are still in school to see for employers to see that, added bonus there. So, going into another, again, sample section, as we talked about relevant coursework, it's not a mandatory section, but especially, as relevant to the position and industry, it can be good to include courses to demonstrate knowledge, excuse me, that you have that maybe, for example, you, again, don't have a ton of industry related, experience, but you have a lot of, again, research experience, which again, that's another section, but I meant to say relevant coursework that could, help you stand out and show your specific knowledge. So that being said, for relevant coursework, and again, you can refer to the samples for these, you don't want to include introductory courses that aren't really demonstrating your specific knowledge in an advanced, course or an advanced field in general. You want to include things or courses that really highlight, again, like specific knowledge that not everyone would have if they weren't applying, if they hadn't been in that academic sphere, you could say. So, like, you don't need to have an intro course that anybody could take, but you could have a more advanced course that is related to the position, again, that you're applying for. You don't need to include every position that you, or I'm sorry, every course that you took throughout college. That's why we, recommend about 2 to 5 courses based on relevancy. And again, optional but helpful to include courses if you have more limited work experience. Another note here too, you don't need to list the registration number for the course. If the person isn't familiar with the University of Albany, they're not going to know with, for example, Rent 502, they don't know what that means. You've got to spell out the full name of the course, in order for them to know what that means and why it's relevant and why you're putting that on your resume. So, and that being said as well, just keeping in mind what's really relevant, you don't need to put every single course you've taken on there because that also just shows you're not really paying attention to what is relevant. So again, I'll keep saying relevant 1,000 times, but that's really one of the key things for a successful and effective resume. So going to the next slide here, again, research and academic experience, that's another not mandatory, but a recommended, or, if you'd like to include this section, especially if you have more limited work experience, this can be helpful. It's, as I said, it's not a required section, but it can be relevant for students that are still developing their skills. And it can be great to highlight certain experiences that you've had that might not be direct, like work experience, but are still relevant to include. So it can showcase, like I mentioned, field specific knowledge and experience. Let's say you did a really, large, we'll say capstone or final project. That was a research project. You worked with the team, you delivered, strong, quantifiable results. This can be something that can really give you a leg up in your, on your resume, especially too, like I said, if it's specific to the field or the industry that you're applying for a role in. And that being said, again, just being specific, it's, what did you do to collect your data? Let's say if we're talking about research, right? Like collaboration skills you used as part of a team in indicating who you're presenting to or who you presented your findings to. What was the final product? Again, in the same way as everything else, being results driven so that you're not just listing it just to list it and that it's really relevant and quantifying, as I keep mentioning as well. So, moving on to the next slide here, building resume experience. So, experience is a required section of your resume. So, this is what employers are really going to be looking at. So, again, making sure that this is close to the top of your resume. And again, we have samples that you can look at and the resume handbook. So, it is not the experience section isn't an exact science, but that being said, you still want to list your experience sections by relevance. So, like for example, including relevant work experience at the top of your resume. So, and more professional experience related to the field or the industry you're applying for a role in. Even relevant leadership experience that might be relevant for or more applicable to the role that you're applying for, volunteer experience even as well. And you can have separate like volunteer experience or leadership experiences too, but if you happen to have, again, relevant experience that wasn't technically considered work that you think is more relevant to the role you're applying for, it's okay to put that, closer to the top. Again, just honing in on the fact that you want to have what is the most relevant closer to the top portion of the resume where employers are going to be the most likely to, see that at their, as their first glance. So, as I said, throughout your resume, you're using bullets to describe the actions and the results of your experiences. And we have several samples for that too. Listing your experiences in the same way in reverse chronological order, making sure you're using the proper tense as discussed, including your title lines with your employer and your organization, including your city and state, position title, and dates of employment as well. And again, we have many samples of those that you can refer to, and we'll click on, real quick throughout this presentation as well. And going more into depth with, okay, how do we actually write our experiences? So going to the next slide here, like I mentioned, you want to have your relevant professional experience at the top, followed by additional work experience, then leadership experience, and then community service and volunteer experience. And this section actually should have an asterisk and even the additional work experience section as well, because those are not mandatory sections, but as applicable. And if you are lacking more relevant professional experience and you want to add more to your resume, you can absolutely include these sections as well. And again, just keeping in mind that, if you have, like I mentioned before, if your leadership experience is more of your relevant experience, you don't have to have maybe a separate section for leadership experience. You could just put that in your relevant, experience or relevant work experience, or even call it, just leadership experience and put it in your relevant section as well. So again, just honing in on that fact. So going into next, experience description. So as I keep mentioning, starting with action verbs, the first word of each bullet should really summarize the skill that's described in that line. Don't use like tasked with, responsible for, duties included, because you want to have a result at the end of your bullet point. So I really recommend here describing your marketable, transferable skills that are both specific to the role and again, have quantifiable results. Really painting a picture of not only what you were tasked with, but also using question words and answering, who, what, when, where, why. And specifically with the why is it important that I'm mentioning this? And why is this connecting back to the job, that you're applying for specifically? So, and as I said, just really taking the time to reflect on why you're putting certain experiences or, products, I guess you could say, on your resume is what's really most important here to again show relevancy. So I'll click on our handbook real quick here. So we're just going to go down to career handbooks, resume handbook. So even though you can feel free to do this in your own time as well, clicking on this link, which again is at the end of the presentation, is really helpful just to see. And I know I've got it on the just because I don't want to click off of the share screen too much. You can see here, we describe what is a resume, more specific resume guidelines, very similarly to what we've been discussing in this presentation. Breakdown of a resume, as we've talked about for each section. So this is really going to be your friend using this handbook. Work experience, suggested section headings here. Action verb examples as you're writing these bullets. Bullet descriptions, resume samples. So absolutely recommend checking these out as you're working on your resume. And yes, absolutely. So definitely feel free to check this out. And going further here, we're just going to move on to the next slide. Skills. So as you could see with that quick look at the resume handbook, you're going to want to have a skills section. The skills section is required. It's a great spot to really stand out as well. And if you have specific technical skills, have experience working with a certain software, for example, that's relevant to your field. This is your time to shine, and include that. Specifically paying attention to what job descriptions highlight in terms of technical skills and making sure to include your proficiency at these skills. Also including languages. Say you have proficiency or fluency in a specific language, especially for international affairs students. This is really important for you to, again, help you stand out as you're applying for roles. And also keeping in mind, what software have you utilized? What specific technical platforms have you used? And if you haven't used as specific or as relevant technical skills, maybe thinking about, again, which specific industry software or which industry platforms have you used that could help you stand out. And just keeping in mind what's really relevant for this section as well. So going into our next slide here, formatting. So I know we've talked about this a lot throughout the presentation, and I'm just going to click through here for a second, but just keeping in mind, or actually, let me go back for a second. Sorry about that. That it's just consistency overall, right? So keeping it 1 to 2 pages as discussed, hopefully, or not hopefully, but more likely 1, but as you gain more experience, can be closer to 2 at the grad level. Using the same font throughout as discussed, and making sure your section headings and titles are relevant and really related to what you're discussing in throughout your experiences. Keeping in mind, again, these aren't paragraphs, really looking at those samples in the resume handbook for bullets that you want to use. And also, just as a general note too, just making sure that your resume is in the shape you want it to be before you submit it to employers. Really spell checking, as we discussed, proofreading, making sure that it is exactly how you want it to be before it is out there, because that is what they're seeing before you even have the opportunity to likely meet them or to interview. So that being said, going a little bit further into skills, as we talked about, going to the next slide here, with Rockefeller specifically, a few main skill sets that NASPA, our accrediting organization, indicates for Rockefeller students include, and those are again for fields or departments like public administration, public affairs, political science, criminal justice, international affairs. There are specific relevancies and, as discussed, career competencies that are relevant to highlight in your resume and that you likely have both from your course knowledge and experience and likely your job experience or your related or relevant internship experience where you're really, again, building on these skills that are related to the NASPA career competencies. So it's really, again, important to identify these skill sets that you're going to want to articulate on your resume. And these are things like problem solving, as listed on the slide, collaborating, managing, critical thinking, being analytical, problem solving, communication, and just really reflecting on these competencies before, as you're reflecting on your experiences as well, and as you're crafting your resume. So it's great to have these again as kind of like starters for when you're making your bullet points. And going further here, articulating skills, NACE career readiness competencies. These are some more competencies that you can utilize as you're writing your bullet points. And that being said, NACE is another governing body for career services, stands for the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They have 8 career readiness competencies that are provided through a survey to see what employers are looking for from students as they're applying, as they're seeing resumes come in, and like what types of common skills and competencies are relevant that are strong, that can be written in strong bullet points and that show specific skills. So I would absolutely recommend utilizing these and referring back to them as you're working on your bullet points as well. And you likely have leadership or even extracurricular activities that have also helped you build on these skills. So definitely keeping this in mind as well. So moving on here, I know we'll go right here. Again, creating that separate skills section as discussed. like we talked about, it will often include language skills and more technical skills and highlighting your proficiency and your specific knowledge with those platforms or, again, technical software is really important as well. And emphasizing transferable skills is not as relevant for the skills section of your resume, but just making sure to incorporate those transferable skills throughout your resume as you're talking about and reflecting on what you did and the results you had with your experiences. So, and again, referring back, as I keep saying, to the resume handbook as you're doing this. So moving on here, just some resume best practices. Going into this, you're really going to want to keep in mind again that resumes often are submitted online nowadays. So that being said, you want to save, say you're working on, let's say, a Word document. You're going to want to save it as a PDF, name it professionally, such as first name, underscore last name, underscore resume, so that the employer, when they click on it, it's again a professional name, but when it's saved as a PDF, it's also just easier for them to open and there will be less likely, formatting issues. So just keeping that in mind, saving and sending your document and submitting it as a PDF. And that being said, as well, as we discussed before, listing your references separately, not on your resume, and also just tailoring your resume again. Thoroughly reviewing the job description for the position that you're applying for, noticing what's emphasized and how have your experiences and relevant skills, how can you kind of tailor your resume to that specific job description. And that being said, making sure that your resume, again, isn't just that it's really accurately, you're articulating the skills you have so that you have the best chance to, again, stand out to employers. And again, as mentioned, keeping your LinkedIn updated. And you can post those, making sure that from your resume that's posted on those experiences are also updated on LinkedIn as well, if you're going to include your LinkedIn URL, especially on your resume. So I know we've only got about 7 minutes or so left. So feel free, like I mentioned, you can either ask, on Zoom or in the chat questions, and we'll go through those as I stop the recording. So just to go into here, what's next? So we've kind of gone over how to tailor a resume, best practices, what not to do, what to do, all of the above. It's kind of now we have to think about how can we take what we, talked about here and, put them into the next steps and an action plan. So I would definitely say, once this presentation is sent out and, sent out via email for you to review, you know, referring back to this and also revising your resume accordingly, having it reviewed by the career office, completing your handshake profile and attaching your updated resume so that hiring managers can view this. And also making sure that you're signed up for the appropriate listservs and that you're getting the Rock Your Career newsletter every week. And you're looking at, okay, career tips, you're looking at incoming job and internship postings and career fairs, workshops, all of the above. Just being, in the know with what opportunities our office has. And again, attending career events, and we have a few of them listed on the slides. Actually, we'll go right into that next. So here are a few of our highlights upcoming. So for us, we are going to be engaging with the government and nonprofit job and internship fair. That's on October 8th and 9th. So that'll be really helpful and beneficial for you to attend in person. We also have the CRCC internship fair, which is in November. So that's off campus, but that's open to both Rockefeller students and, the main anyone who's not a Rockefeller student as well. And we have additional Rock Your Career skills workshops as well. So they're listed on this slide and then also on Handshake. So everything is listed via Handshake. And then again, it's great to attend these workshops such as this one in live time, but they'll also be posted later on via YouTube, and then the recording will be sent to you via email too. So we've got here, and we'll wrap up in just a second so we can get to our questions. Employer information sessions. We have one tomorrow, the New York State Assembly. So that will be a great one to attend, employer info session via Zoom. And we have a bunch more, as you can see, and these are all on Handshake. So you can register for them via Handshake as well. So just to wrap up here too, with our career resources that I'd encourage you to visit our website. Again, career handbooks. We have the resume handbook I keep referring to, but then also we have the YouTube channel for recorded career workshops, Handshake, additional job and internship sites, Big Interview, LinkedIn. Our UAlbany Career Advisory Network, where you can connect with alumni for career chats. And as we've discussed, and as you can see here, appointments and office hours. So you can schedule an appointment with any one of us via Zoom or in person, and that would be on Handshake. So, and also just keeping in mind, don't send appointment requests via email. Just do that directly through Handshake, but feel free to reach out to us with any questions about that. And we're also happy to connect you with the main office too. But these are our drop-in hours as well, whether I'm in person, but also uptown, but primarily downtown and available via Zoom too. So that's what we've got here. And these are also they're listed via email. Once you receive an email from the Rockefeller Career Services email, you'll see what our drop-in hours are. And they're also available in the newsletter too. And you can see our availability via Handshake.